Welcome to our presentation. Our group name is the Four Musketeers. Group members are Andrea, Jessica, Ariana, and Morgan. Our topic is subtraction. To begin this presentation, let's review the Arizona Mathematics Standards for grades level kindergarten through 5th grade. In kindergarten, the focus is going to be on understanding subtraction as taken apart and taken from. By the end of the year, students should fluently add and subtract within 5. And then in 1st grade, the focus is going to be on representing and solving problems that involve subtraction, understanding and applying properties of operation, and the relationship between addition and subtraction, and how to subtract within 10, and lastly, working with subtraction equations. And then in the 2nd grade, students are going to learn how to represent and solve problems involving subtraction and subtracting within 20. By the end of 3rd grade, students will have the ability to subtract within 1,000 using strategies and algorithms based on place value, properties of operation, and/or the relationship between addition and subtraction. And in the 4th grade, students will have the understanding of adding and subtracting of fractions as joining and separating parts by referring to the same whole. And then lastly, in 5th grade, students will use equivalent of fractions to add and subtract fractions. The importance of progression in subtraction. It is vital for students to grasp subtraction to enhance their knowledge throughout their educational years. The progression in subtraction. Subtraction is used in every grade level from kindergarten on. It is later used as a basic knowledge to enhance future lessons in counting money, telling time, learning fractions, and more. Subtraction isn't just useful in the classroom. Subtraction helps when measuring the distance of a walk to the library, when deciding how many pieces to cut a cake into at a party, when calculating how many apples you'll need to make an apple pie. We use subtraction without even knowing it. What to keep in mind when teaching subtraction. Introduce vocabulary and symbols. A key learning for students is to learn that there is more than one way to read an equation. An example we used is 9 minus 2 equals 7 is going to be the same as 9 take away 2 equals 7. Another thing to keep in mind for teachers when teaching subtraction is place value. Place value will help build a strong foundation as students learn to subtract a larger number from 2 digits. An example we have is 635 minus 123. We begin with 6 100 pieces, 3 tens, and 5 ones. Beginning in the ones place, we'll take 3 ones away from 5, and then in the tens, we'll take away 2, and then in the hundreds, we take 1 100. Then we're left with 512. Later on, we'll discuss regrouping and subtraction using place value. For some students, adding will come a lot easier than subtraction. One way to help those students who struggle with subtraction is showing them that subtraction is just the inverse of addition. Adding 2 and 6 results in 8, and using those same numbers, rearranging them will give us 8 minus 2 equals 6, and 8 minus 6 equals 2. Referring back to the 1st grade standards, teachers should keep in mind their students need to practice more word problems. An example we have is Sally brought 10 cookies to school and she wanted to share with her friends. She gave 2 cookies to her friend, Mary. How many cookies does Sally have left? And she'll have 8 cookies. This will help them as they get older and read more complex word problems. The second example we have is a 2-step math problem. Billy has 2 boxes of pencils with 8 pencils in each box. He gave 6 away to his brother Alex. How many pencils does Billy have left? So we have 8 plus 8 equals 16, and then 16 minus 6 will leave us with 10. Student thinking in mathematical models. Mathematical models will help students explore problem solving in a way that works best for them. When using modeling, it primarily will be a lesson on the process to solving a problem, not just finding the answer itself. Modeling helps encourage students to test the many different ways an equation can be found. Students can demonstrate adjusting numbers to create friendly numbers. Doing this makes the equation easier to subtract from and also gets the same result. When a student does this, it shows they have an understanding of how numbers relate to one another and how they can be adjusted in a manner that makes sense to them. So in this example, the student is changing the numbers to create friendly numbers, meaning they're just making the numbers a little bit easier to subtract from. By adding the same number to both sides, it balances the equation, leading to the correct answer. So we have 674 that becomes 676, and 328 that becomes 330, and that will give us 346. The various methods to teaching subtraction. In the next few slides, we'll be reviewing a few different things, such as regrouping and subtraction, number line, and the manipulatives. So starting off with regrouping and subtraction, here's a problem broken down, and we're going to make it a lot more simpler. So instead of writing it normally, the way it's shown on the far left, we're going to change it up a little bit. We're We're going to add 50 plus 2 and then 30 plus 8. So now we're subtracting the ones place, and we'll see that we cannot take away 8. So now we're going to be, here's the regrouping part of it. So 10 is taken from 50, so that leaves us with 40. The 10 is off in the ones and gives us 12. So now 40 and 12. We can start to subtract 12, take away 8, and 40 take away 30. We end up with 10 plus 8 giving us 14. And then moving on to the number line. Using a number line to teach students is a great visual to use. A number line is just that, a straight horizontal line. Numbers placed in even increments along the length. So we're going to have positive and negative numbers. So here's our problem. 8 take away 2. So Lucy has 8 carrots and she began to eat and she ate 5. She decided to save the rest for later. How many does she have left? So then we're going to start off with 8 and then jump over to the 5 and we'll have 3. And then the last method teachers can use to teach subtraction is the use of manipulatives. So for example, we have little fish at the pet store. Our problem is that Brian went to the pet store to buy some fish. He counted how many there were to start off with. He had 9, and then he decided to take 2 home. So we're going to take 2 fish away. He's going to take 2 home. And then when he recounts them, he should have 7 fish left. Another option for parents and teachers to use is the Glencoe virtual manipulatives. Misconceptions students can have about subtraction. There are many misconceptions when it comes to math in general, but today I'll be talking about the misconceptions when it comes to subtraction. I decided to choose 4 common errors students come across when they're subtracting, and that's where to start when given a problem, taking a lower number and subtracting it from a bigger number, when to subtract, and the regrouping process. So where to start? The first misconception is when students first learn to subtract, they get confused as to where to start. Some students start anywhere when they see a problem, and then they get confused and frustrated. And then sometimes students work the problem going across, but one way to start from left to right and starting at the top and subtracting from the bottom. Using the example above, I'm going to walk you through the steps on how to solve the subtraction problem. First, I'm going to go to the hundreds place, so starting at the top where the 3 is, I'm going to subtract it from the 1, which is down below, and then they would make a new number 2. The second step, I'm going to move over to the right on top in the tens place and subtract 2 from 2, becoming 0. And then last, I'm going to move into the ones place, so that 1 more over to the right, subtract 8 from 4, and 4 being left over, then the answer becomes 204. The second misconception, students taking a lower number and subtracting a bigger number. When students run into this problem, they assume they're subtracting like the normal way, but they need to think about it. When they start to subtract a number from a bigger number, they get confused because the answer is when they solve the problem, then the answer just ends up being a negative number. The answer is not wrong, it's certain situations that makes a little bit more sense. So for instance, if Peter had $1 and John came over to collect debt, Peter ends up owing $3. Peter will be negative $2 because he spent the other 2 on candy and he can't be in a negative number. Last mistake students have is using the commutative property when it comes to subtraction. Students cannot reverse the problem because subtraction is not a commutative property, only multiplication and addition. The third misconception is not knowing when to subtract. The reason is that students sometimes struggle with vocabulary or subtraction, but they know the addition vocabulary better. A lot of students have a hard time with word problems because of the vocabulary, but if they keep practicing and over time, it'll just become a lot easier. This leads to the second reason of not knowing when to subtract and struggling to compare the difference between parts of the whole when comparing 2 different outcomes from the word problems. Sometimes students are confused by subtracting whole numbers because they haven't really worked through them a lot, so they get a little bit more confused. I'm going to show you an example of a word problem that deals with a part and a whole. Jerry went to the store and bought 5 pieces of candy bars. On the way back, Jerry dropped 2 candy bars and Bob dropped 1. So let's try to see who has the least. First, I would dissect the problem and write down who has the least amount of bars. Next, I would compare to find the difference between them. So then I would start to subtract 4 minus 3 equals 1 being the difference. And the last part, I would subtract the fallen candy bars to see who has the least amount. So that would be Jerry at 3 and Bob at 4. Lastly, the last misconception students are going to have is the regrouping part. The common mistakes when they regroup is borrowing from a number but not the actual regroup it over into the last number that needs it because it's smaller than the bottom number. The second common mistake with regrouping is not taking away 1 and carrying it over and just adding it to a random one. The examples on the side are the same numbers, but the numbers are used in different ways. The first mistake shows 8 being crossed out and turned into a 7, but then it's not being regrouped to make a 2 into a 12. The second mistake shows that 8 not being crossed out and the 2 is just a random 1. And the last way is the way of regrouping subtraction is where the 8 is crossed out, changes to a 7, and the 1 is carried over to a 2 to make it a 12. Then solve the problem. So 12 minus 4 equals 8. Then moving it over to the left, 7 minus 3 equals 4. Coming to the answer, 48. And that's it. Thank you so much.